feelings. People join these kinds of events because they feel connected. They feel connected to the person. They feel connected to the family. And I didn't know Mrs. Zucker, but I know Beryl. And he's one of the easiest people to like. It's very easy to have him as a friend. He does all the work, and all you have to do is just be around. And I'm sure that his wife was our partner in crime was an Raizel. And that's why there's such an outpouring of love. Of course, this is a tragedy. It's an unbelievable tragedy. People's reactions to tragedy is predictable. People always wake up when things happen that are difficult. But sometimes people feel very as if it's touched them personally. And this is one of those times. And it's one of those times, I believe, because of who the people are, who the people were, who the people are. They were just, we saw them as good. We see them as good. What we should be, they were. What we should be, they are. And our best self interfaces with Beryl and with Raizel. In other words, our best, when we are at our best, we have some connection to how they live their lives. And it triggers in us something very, very positive and very, very emotional. And therefore, there is this very unusual outpouring of love in this case. I think it says something about them. And it also says something about us and our personalities and our nature. I want to start, first of all, by saying something about the name Raizel. I didn't prepare anything on Toiba because I didn't know that her name was Toiba Raizel. So Raizel, I had a chance to prepare. Toiba, I didn't have a chance to prepare. So we'll have to leave Toiba for another time. Toiba in Yiddish probably means a pigeon. I don't think it means deaf. In Yiddish, Toiba means a person, a toiber is Toiba, but Toiba, a taibel. Taibel means a pigeon, a yoina, a pigeon, which is a kosher bird, which is actually able to be a carbon in the Beis HaMikdash. There is a Hebrew name, yoina, it's one of those names that men have and women have, and it's one of those names that goes either way. And Toiba means a yoina, a pigeon. There's a lot of discussion in Hasidus about yoinim, about pigeons. And one of the interesting ideas that's brought about yoinim is that they stare at each other, and they have a zivug, they have a very deep connection by looking at each other. And I suppose the message, the idea, the lesson, the significance, the meaning of this is that we know that the eyes are the windows to the soul. The eyes of a person reveal what's going on behind them. But not everybody's eyes reveal that much. Oftentimes eyes hide. And the purer a person is, the more his eyes reveal what's going on behind those eyes. This is just a thought. I didn't prepare this, so this is spontan on Toiba, which again, I'm assuming Toiba means a pigeon and not a deaf person. Now, assuming that Toiba means a deaf person, the Gemara speaks about people acting deaf. When you hear Lashon Hara, when you hear things you're not supposed to hear. So for certain things, people are selectively deaf. But the Raizel, of course, Raizel is Yiddish for a rose, a shoshana. And there's so much discussion in Hasidus about the significance, about the meaning of a rose. The ideas which are brought, first of all, are that a rose has 13 petals. Now, of course, the only rose that has 13 petals is the rose that's found in the Zohar. The physical roses have many, many more than 13 petals. But the idea of a rose is that it has 13 petals. And the significance, the meaning of the 13 petals is that it goes on the Yud Gimel Midas HaRachamim. The Gimel Midas HaRachamim are the Midas of HaKadosh Baruch Hu that are above what we deserve. That's the way you understand the Yud Gimel Midas HaRachamim. That, what Rashi brings, that Hashem told Moshe Rabbeinu the Yud Midas HaRachamim, and included in the Yud Midas HaRachamim, is that Hashem should have mercy even on sinners, And Moshe Rabbeinu said to the Eibishter, the bad guys, who needs them? And the Eibishter said to Moshe Rabbeinu, mark my word, you're going to be invoking these words yourself. The Yud Gimel Midas HaRachamim means that the Rachamim of HaKadosh Baruch Hu are not dependent, are not conditional, are not relative to our own worthiness and our own deservedness, what we're entitled to. The Gimel Midas HaRachamim is Hashem gives us beyond. So that's one idea about Shoshana, about a rose that has 13 petals, and the 13 petaled rose represents the idea of the Gimel Midas HaRachamim. And of course, the second thing about a rose, which is also brought in many, many Sfarim, is the idea of Shoshana ben Achoichem. A rose, by nature, grows amongst thorns. And it's ironic that something so beautiful, something which has such a pleasant odor, protects itself with prickly branches of thorns. And of course, it's brought the classic example of Shoshana ben Achoichem is Rivka Imenu. She lived in Charan amongst Rishayim, and her rose was pungent and sweet and pleasant and positive, notwithstanding that her environment was so prickly. So another idea associated with Raizel is this idea of a rose that even when it sits amongst thorns, in other words, its environment does not have an effect on it. Usually, the nature of human beings is that the Rambam writes, we're affected by our environment. If we are in an environment which is not so desirable, we develop undesirable character traits. If we find ourselves in an environment where people are very selfish, we develop selfish character traits, which is why the Rambam writes that if a person finds us amongst bad people, he should go and live in a desert. A rose amongst thorns, Shoshana ben Achoichem, which is what Raizel means, you can find yourself in any environment. A good environment, a bad environment, a supportive environment, an antagonistic environment. No matter what kind of environment you find yourself in, the rose is a rose. It's beautiful, has a very pleasant odor. And one of the ideas which is also brought, of course, is that not only does a rose thrive amongst the thorns bring forward what the rose is. The physical nature of thorns is that they poke holes. And the nature of flowers is that when you poke a hole in the flower, it gives out its aroma. So not only is a rose a mashal for something that's not affected by its environment, but a rose is the kind of thing that when it's in an environment which is less than desirable, the challenges around the rose bring out the beauty of the rose. So I wanted to start with just a couple of words, a couple of thoughts on the name Raizel. And now that I discovered Toiba Raizel, so we Toibed a little bit. Rabbi said the topic I'm supposed to talk about is Moshiach. That's what I was asked to discuss with the time we have. This is a class, but it's an oral lecture. There's no text. We're not reading from any text. I'm going to talk. And the topic that has been selected is the topic of Moshiach, which of course is close to everybody's heart. And how do I say it? It's realistic. Moshiach is a real thing. For some people, Moshiach is a real thing because we so desperately need Moshiach. For some people, Moshiach is a real thing because the Rebbe has inspired us to desire Moshiach, not just because there's challenges and difficulties in the world, but because Moshiach is right. Moshiach is what is supposed to be. So we're going to talk a little bit about Moshiach. And I want to begin with a story that I recently read. Rabbi Chaim Gutnick, Harav Chaim Gutnick from Melbourne, Australia, was a rabbi for his whole adult life. He was a rabbi of a congregation. He's one of the founders of the Lubavitch community in Melbourne. He was instrumental in a lot of the things that happened in Melbourne today. Melbourne, of course, is an Ir Ve'ein B'Yisrael. Melbourne is as beautiful as any city where a large population of Jewish people exist any place in the world, but it wasn't always that way. It was once small and precarious and vulnerable and lonely, and Rabbi Gutnick has been in Australia since forever. By the way, I guess I should tell you the story while I'm talking about Rabbi Gutnick. How did he end up in Australia? Now, I'll probably tell the story incorrectly and someone will fix me, which is fine, but I'll tell you the story as I understand it. There were a group of Bachrim on a ship that floated away from Europe and ended up in Australia. I'm assuming it was the Bachrim from the Tel Aviv Yeshiva where Rabbi Gutnick attended. And they ended up in Melbourne, Australia. And when they came to Melbourne, they were quarantined. They were isolated. They were kept separate from the greater population. And the Jewish community in Melbourne, you're talking now 80 years ago in 1940, decided that Melbourne was not for the Telza Yeshiva Bacharim, and the Telza Bacharim were not for Melbourne. In other words, they came to the conclusion that the community in Melbourne, Australia was not exactly ready for an infusion of Talmidei Yeshiva from the old country at that time. So they, however arrangements were made, they put them on a ship and they sent them off to America. Rabbi Gutnick and his brother, Aleim Hashalom, were also in Melbourne, and they wrote the Frierdiker Rebbe a letter, and they asked the Frierdiker Rebbe what they should do. And the Frierdiker Rebbe wrote them back a letter saying that the Hashem arranges the steps of a person. Like we say in the morning, Hamechin mitzadei gover, the Eibusher decides on the steps we're going to take in our life. So the Rebbe Frierdiker Rebbe wrote to them, if you ended up in Melbourne, that's the proof you should stay in Melbourne. And they stayed in Melbourne. Their mother joined them later. I'm probably messing up the story, but their mother lived in Melbourne, in Sydney with them. Their stepfather lived with them in Sydney. And they were some of the most important early rabbis of from Yiddishkeit in Australia. Anyway, Rabbi, getting back to the story that I want to tell. Rabbi Gutnick visited Eretz Yisrael right after the 6-Day War. He went to visit Eretz Yisrael. And it was an exciting time. I don't remember the 6-Day War, but maybe some of you do. The 6-Day War was one of those incredible moments in Jewish history because the Jewish people woke up. The Jewish people woke up. There was an awakening amongst Jews. There was a solidarity. There was a sense of achdus amongst Jews, which was far greater even than it happened during the Holocaust. Yidden all over the world were awakened. And Yidden felt it was an incredible moment of brotherhood. Every Yid felt like every other Yid is his brother. Jews who were incredibly frum, and Jews who were incredibly not frum, all felt there was an incredible sense of brotherhood. And of course, before the war, there was a fear of terrible things that were going to happen. The Rebbe, of course, predicted that the Rebbe would perform all kinds of miracles, and of course, it all occurred. And the time leading up to the 6-Day War, during the 6-Day War, and after the 6-Day War, it was an opportunity. It was a very special moment. And if you look at the Rebbe Sichos, you see that all summer long, the Rebbe is talking about this opportunity in conjunction with the 6-Day War. And Rabbi Gutnick visited Australia, and he went to the Kesel HaMa'aravi, and of course, the Rebbe had made Mivtza Tefillin, hundreds of thousands of people. And it was a great awakening amongst Jews. On his way back to Melbourne, he stopped in New York, and he had a yechidus with the Rebbe. He met the Rebbe in yechidus. And a few months ago, one of the organizations, one of the websites, put out minutes of that yechidus. I found it online. Someone must have sent it to me. I printed it out and I read it. And the yechidus is very compelling. It's a very interesting yechidus. It's quite long. What you see in this yechidus is that he has an agenda and the Rebbe has a different agenda. This is going back over 50 years. Rabbi Gutnick's agenda is to suggest to the Rebbe that maybe the Rebbe is Moshiach, based on the things that the Rebbe had predicted and all kinds of other wonderful things. When you read the minutes, and I'm assuming they were written then, the Rebbe doesn't even respond to it. The Rebbe doesn't even hear it. He goes straight over it. And the Rebbe, if I may use these words, is beating up on Rabbi Gutnick. He's pushing him and pushing him and pushing him. And every time Rabbi Gutnick tries to make a suggestion, the Rebbe pushes harder, pushes harder, pushes harder. What is the content of the conversation? What's the nature of the talk? The nature of the talk is the Rebbe is saying now is a golden opportunity. The Rebbe says to him, you should know that if Rabbonim would get up today, rabbis would get up today in their shuls and say, Jews keep Torah and mitzvahs, they would. But the rabbis are not saying it. And they're not saying it because they're afraid. They're not saying it because they're sheepish. They're not saying it because they're reticent. The Rebbe actually says to Rabbi Gutnick something which is very disturbing. The Rebbe says to Chaim Gutnick, the leadership of the Jewish people avoid me. Avoid me, the Rebbe says, because they don't want me to push them. They don't want me to make them feel uncomfortable. The Rebbe was pushing. And Rabbi Gutnick has this yechidus. It goes on for a long time. And the Rebbe says to him, every rabbi has to get up in his congregation and say, be frum. put on tefillin, eat kosher, keep Shabbos, use the mikveh, and people will listen. So Rabbi Gutnick explains to the Rebbe why it's not so easy. First of all, he says nobody's doing it. If I'm going to do it, I'm going to be the only one. So the Rebbe says to him, if you'll do it, others will do it. And the Rebbe is really very single-minded about this. Right? This is a story that happened over 50 years ago. The Rebbe says, now's an opportunity. Jews are ready to hear it. You have to say to Jewish people, they have to be frum. That's the thrust, that's the gist, that's the spirit of the Yechidus as I got it. And I read it, and of course, a couple of things crossed my mind. The first thing that crossed my mind is that this is the other side of the Rebbe, right? We all know the Rebbe as a Yid who's kulei avos Yisrael, his whole mitzvah is avos Yisrael. He loves every Jew infinitely. Even the Jew who he criticizes and screams at while he's criticizing him and while he's pushing him, he loves him. Kulei avos Yisrael. And the Rebbe is mamish makoira brachas. There's never been a Rebbe like this. How many miracles did the Rebbe perform in his lifetime? Millions, huh? And now more than ever. Teil Talpias, the Rebbe brings in the Sikhe, call Apias pen, the whole world turns to 770. You have a problem, you come to 770. The Rebbe used to say that when things are good, you forget about me. When things are bad, you come running to me. And the Rebbe had a classification which is called Tzadas Chassidim. Chassidim are only good when things are not good. But the fact is that Rebbe, his whole mitzvah was obviously Yisrael. His whole mitzvah was to help a fellow Jew. I read someplace that the Rebbe told somebody, when someone asks me for help because someone is ill, I say a kapitel till. A Yid asks me to daven for them. How could I refuse them? I daven for them. That's one Rebbe, right? The Rebbe was kulei avos Yisrael and kulei brachas. But there's another Rebbe. And the other Rebbe is a general or a king who has a mission and a task. And this Rebbe is incessant. He pushes and he pushes and he pushes. It's never good enough. The Rebbe told many people, including some very important people who thought that by coming to Lubavitch and giving tzedakah, they're doing the Rebbe a favor. There's many occasions where the Rebbe says to people who've given lots and lots of tzedakah, the Rebbe says, I can give you one guarantee. One thing I can guarantee you. I will never be satisfied. I give you my word. You'll never be able to give tzedakah enough that I should say you've met your fill. Or you've done enough mitzvahs, you've been mekadev enough yidden, you've done enough good deeds that it's sufficient. It's never enough. And this is another Rebbe that we all grew up with and live with, the Rebbe that pushes and demands and commands. And Hasidim try to do a little bit of what the Rebbe says. And can you meet the Rebbe's expectations? Can any Chassid say, I fulfilled 100% of what it is that the Rebbe wanted? I think we all have sufficient honesty and humility to say that it's not possible. We try to, as they say in Yiddish, geben dem Rebbe a bissel nachas ruach, to give the Rebbe a little bit of satisfaction, a little bit of pleasure. The Rebbe pushes. And think about the Rebbe's point of view. The Rebbe sits in Brooklyn. The whole world is in front of his eyes. And he sees a Yid is lost over here and a Yid is lost over there. He says, it's not over here and it's not over there. And his neshama cries out. And he gives koiches. And he sends shluchim that every one of these people should be reached and every one of their problems should be redeemed. Every one of their difficulties should be alleviated. But the Rebbe pushes. The Rebbe pushes. So you read, I'm going back to the story. Rabbi Gutnick comes to the Rebbe after visiting Israel, right after the 6-Day War. And the Jewish people, right after the 6-Day War, Jews were in Candyland. It was a carnival. The mood was they were walking on water. I mean, Yidden were in such a heightened state. Yidden felt so proud and so happy and so together. And the Rebbe says, Arav has to get up in the shul and say, be frum. And he pushes him and he pushes him and he pushes him. The Rabbi Gutnick says, okay, I'm going to go back to Australia and I'm going to do what you're asking me to do. But Rabbi Gutnick says, I'm only one. Most of the Rabbanim are not prepared. But this is a story. It's not a single story. It's a typical story. There's 1,000 stories like these, where people came to the Rebbe and the Rebbe just said, no, there's a constant need for work. No, there's a constant need for work. I recently heard a story from Rabbi Friedman from Tzas. Rabbi Elik Friedman soll gesund sein. You know, listen. He told a few stories on an audio, and it came to me somehow on WhatsApp. So the story was, this is just a Shena Maise, and the Welt sagt like a Medrische Kirella Maise. The stories are always the best. Rabbi Friedman tells the following story, that a man, two Bobeve Hasidim were walking in Eastern Parkway in 1951 or 52, circa, something like that. They're walking in Eastern Parkway. And one says to the other, that's the Lubavitch Rebbe. The Rebbe was walking, and as we all know, the Rebbe used to walk alone. The Rebbe didn't have an entourage, and the Rebbe didn't have a COVID. You know, the Rebbe was the most theistic man in the world. So the second one says to the first one, I'm going to go and say shalom. Go tell him hello. So the first one says to the second one, no, you can't stop this guy in the street. Bad idea. If you want to speak to him, go into his secretary, you make an appointment, and go in and see him. And the second one says, the first one says, listen, I don't live here. I live in Cleveland. I don't know when I'm going to have another opportunity. I'm going to go tell the Rebbe shalom. So he walks up to the Rebbe and he says, shalom aleichem. And the Rebbe asks him, where are you coming from? So he tells the Rebbe, I live in Cleveland. This is the early 50s. It's a long time ago. So the Rebbe says to him, yeah, I hear that in Cleveland there's a situation with a mikveh. The Frum community or the community at large is having some kind of difficulties building the mikveh. He doesn't say, and Rabbi Friedman didn't say what the problems were, but there were issues with the mikveh. So this Yid says to the Rebbe, I try to stay out of concepts. When people get into arguments, I try to stay out of those things. I don't make sin. It's not my department. I don't. So the Rebbe says to him, I live in Brooklyn, and I'm concerned about the mikveh in Cleveland. And you live in Cleveland, and the mikveh in Cleveland is no concern of yours. So he goes back to his friend, and he tells his friend what the Lubavitcher Rebbe told him. And his friend said to him, see, I told you, don't go over to the Lubavitcher Rebbe. Because 9 times out of 10, the Rebbe's not going to say you're a nice, sweet person. 9 times out of 10, the Rebbe's going to say, no, 2 epis. And of course, when we grew up, I don't remember the Rebbe from the 50s and the 60s. I remember the Rebbe from the 70s and the 80s. We knew and we felt that the metzias of the Rebbe is a tviyah, right? The Rebbe's identity demands. The Rebbe's identity expects of us to do something. And there was a constant sense of medaf episton. And of course, the way the Rebbe felt about it or communicated to us of it, you could never do enough, right? It wasn't like Chas V'Shalom, the Rebbe was not happy with us. But he always pushed us. He always wanted more, right? The Rebbe used to bring the medrash, that if whatever you have, in human nature, you have $100, you want $200. So the Rebbe said, you shouldn't just do it for me. Your nature should be, no matter how much good you've done, you should do even more good. So this is a very big part of the Rebbe, right? Like I said before, there's the Rebbe that's our father and that's so sweet, and there's the Rebbe that's a general, that's a teveya, that demands. And of course, we all remember, we know that the Rebbe screamed about Mashiach. So I heard once, I obviously was not there, but I heard that the Rebbetzin Chayamushka was sitting in the house on President Street, and there was a Fabrengen that was going on live, and the Rebbetzin was listening to the Fabrengen, and the Rebbe was particularly upset about the fact that Mashiach isn't here. Particularly upset about the fact that Moshiach isn't here. And he was being quite emotionally expressive about that. Now, I don't know what sikh it was. I don't know what the occasion was. But the Rebbe was talking about Mashiach. The Rebbe talked about Mashiach a lot. So the Rebbetzin commented to whoever was sitting with her that my man meant as Allah will Mashiach azefil v'yerchel. My husband thinks that everybody wants Mashiach as much as I want Mashiach. She was commenting about the intensity of the Rebbe's emotion and saying, my husband thinks everybody wants Mashiach as much as he wants Mashiach. And this is a message. The message is that the Rebbe wanted that we should want Mashiach. This is a very, very serious and real message. The Rebbe wanted that we should want Mashiach. And as the Rebbe said many times, not want Mashiach because he wants Mashiach, want Mashiach because we want Mashiach. And if I may add, not just want Mashiach because there's tzadis in the world, and there is no shortage of that, but want Mashiach because Mashiach is right. want Mashiach because Mashiach is right. The Rebbe wanted to inspire in us that we should want Mashiach. And all the emotion, all the intensity, all the passion was the Rebbe trying to wake us up to the idea that it's important that we should want Mashiach. And I'm going to share a couple of thoughts in this vein. Some of what I'm going to say is personal opinion, okay? You don't have to agree. Nobody has to agree with anything I say. Just don't throw any rocks at me, please. For 10 years, the Rebbe was speaking about Mashiach. I would say that the Rebbe started talking about Mashiach incessantly in the early 80s. My hergish is that it started in 1982, Membeis, when the new Hayom Yom came out, and the Rebbe wrote that the abbreviation for Toshin Membeis was Teheshnas Bias Mashiach. The Rebbe talked about Mashiach for years. And there were all kinds of conversations about Mashiach, And I grew up with this, right? I was a teenager during the 80s, and then I was a young man during the 80s. And the Rebbe must have screamed about Mashiach 100 times. I'm going to say 100 times. I don't mean he spent 2 minutes at the end of the Sikha. I mean the Rebbe carrying on for an hour about Mashiach. In that decade, the Rebbe spoke many, many Sikhas, very passionate and pointed Sikhas about Mashiach. And forgive me if I'm wrong, but this is how I remember it. When the Rebbe used to speak these emotional Sikhas about Mashiach, those of us who were at the Fabrengen were smiling. We were entertained. Now the Rebbe is screaming, "Why are you laughing? Why do you think it's funny?" And the answer was, this is how I remember it. Now, if somebody remembers it differently, Gesundheit, hey, you're welcome to share with me your disagreement, but this is how I remember it. Because in our minds, when the Rebbe talked about Mashiach, all of those sikhas, he wasn't talking to us. He was talking to the Eibishter. The Rebbe cried about Mashiach and screamed about Mashiach and prosted about Mashiach and screamed about Mashiach. In our minds, all of the talks that the Rebbe gave about Mashiach were conversations between him and God. And I think the Rebbe tried very hard to impress upon us that he meant us. That he wasn't talking to the Eibishter, that he was talking to us. And what he was saying to us is, Mashiach comes when we want him. Mashiach comes when we demand him. Mashiach comes when we ask for him. And I'm going to remind you of something. The Rebbe made a campaign. It was the beginning of Cheshvan, in I think Mem Zayin. I may have the years wrong, but I think it was Mem Zayin, which is 86 to 87. They made a campaign. And I'll tell you the story of that campaign. Maybe some of you remember it. The Rebbe, by Fabreng, told a story. And I remember the Fabreng distinctly. I don't know why, but I remember it very, very distinctly. The Rebbe told a story. He said, I got a letter from a woman who received a chain letter. You know what a chain letter is? It's a pyramid, right? Where you send $1 to the name of the person on top of the list, and you cross their name off. Then you add your name to the bottom of the list, and you send it to 10 people. And if you have 4 names on the list, and it's 4 generations, you give $1 to Pliny Ben Pliny, and you can get back $10,000. It's a scheme. What they call it, a Ponzi scheme. It's unsustainable. It can't work, but people have been doing it forever. So when people send out a chain letter, the key to the chain letter is that the chain should not be broken, that every person who gets the letter should send the letter to 10 people. Otherwise, if the chain breaks down, you can send somebody $1 and not get back 10 cents. So the chain letters, if you've ever seen them, I have seen them, come with many threats. On the bottom of the page, there's a threat. And the threat says, tell stories. It's 1955, some guy broke the chain. And he was walking in the forest and hit by lightning. Another 1971, someone got a letter and he broke the chain. They try to scare you into not breaking the chain. So this woman, an old lady, got such a letter and she panicked. They're telling her to send $1 to a stranger and then to put her name on the bottom of a piece of paper and send it to 10 people. And that if she breaks the chain, so she wrote the Rebbe a letter. And she asked the Rebbe what to do. She's afraid. She got this letter. What should I do? So the Rebbe said, by Fabring, and the Rebbe told the story like as if there was nothing else in the world going on, with so much patience. The Rebbe said, the first thing is, I think the Rebbe said Mistkasten, which is Yiddish for garbage can. I think the Rebbe used that word. I told her to throw it in the garbage, but I may be wrong. It's a long time ago. The zweite Sache habe ich gesagt, the Rebbe said, then I said to this lady that she should forget about it, and she shouldn't worry about it, that she shouldn't think about it, and there's something to be afraid of, and it's all garnish mit nicht. That was the story that Rebbe told me from Ring. But he explained what a chain letter is, and explained that this woman was afraid, and explained how he had to talk this lady down from her fear. And then the Rebbe continued. And he said, the Rebbe said, I asked myself a question that Hashem Tov said that from everything that a Jew sees or hears, he has to learn a lesson in Avodas Hashem. But this is a Torah from the Baal Shem Tov that the Rebbe said hundreds of times, possibly thousands of times. One of the most frequently quoted thoughts that the Rebbe repeated in almost every Fabrengen was that the Baal Shem Tov said, for everything a Jew sees or hears, he has to learn a lesson in Avodas Hashem. So the Rebbe said, why did this come to me? Why was it brought to my attention? This woman had a fear. She chose to consult me. And I was able to help her, so to speak. I mean, the Rebbe didn't say it that many words, but that was the spirit of his words. Well, what's the lesson in it for me? The Rebbe said, the lesson that I learned is that I have to create a chain letter. But a chain letter, I remember the Rebbe saying, on kain abchodim, you're not going to threaten anybody, you're not going to frighten anybody. The letter is going to be written in a very positive spirit, and the tone is going to be to ask people to do it out of the goodness of their hearts, without any threats and so on. And the Rebbe proposed we make a chain letter. What was the substance? What was the content of the chain letter the Rebbe proposed? The Rebbe quoted several Sfarim, and then later on it became more Sfarim, but the Rebbe quoted several Sfarim who say very plainly that Moshiach is not going to come till we demand him. Moshiach is not going to come till we ask for him. One of them is a Radak. One of them is a Radak from the Rishonim, the Radak in Sefer Daniel, and I believe it says the Lashon Haftzara. Moshiach is not going to come until we insist, until we demand. The Rebbe asked every one of us to compile a letter in quoting these sources, that the coming of Mashiach depends on us demanding Mashiach, and to send it to 10 people, and to ask each one of those 10 people to send it to a further 10 people, and ask them to create a chain that should not be broke. This was in 1987, Tafshin Mem Zayin. And when you think about that today, when you think about it in hindsight, it's very obvious that the Rebbe was saying that it's incumbent upon each one of us, it's a requirement, it's a necessity, it's an obligation to want Mashiach. And that Mashiach's coming depends on our desiring him. Now, I remember that story. I was in yeshiva in California at the time. We were shluchim. We wrote chain letters, sent them to people. But frankly, we didn't think too much about it. Honestly, we didn't think too much about it. Today, I think about it. I think about it so much. Which leads me to a point, which I think is a very, very important point. I think it's a very, very important point. That point is that all of us who are old enough, and even those of us who are young, but certainly those of us who were grown-ups in 1991, and they remembered the Sikh of Chav Ches Nisan. Sikh that the Rebbe said on Thursday night after he came from the oil, the whole Sikh was a few minutes, where the Rebbe said, I did everything I could to bring Mashiach, and the Rebbe used very strong words about the fact that he didn't succeed, and now I'm giving it over to each one of you, and to see to bring Mashiach and so on. We all remember that Sikh. I remember that Sikh. You can't forget that Sikh. I think Lubavitch, the Sikh is 29 years ago, 29 years ago. It's a long, long time ago, 29 years ago. I think Lubavitch, to this day, hasn't recovered from that Sikh. There's a PTSD, there's a traumatic stress. The words and the tone that the Rebbe used in that Sikh is so strong, and in our minds, so negative, and if I may add a word, filled with despair, with Yush, which is so uncharacteristic of the Rebbe that we don't know how to eat the Sikh. We don't know what to do with it. We don't know where to put it. I think it changed us. It changed us forever. And we certainly don't know how to understand the Sikh. So I want to make a simple suggestion. I want to make a very simple suggestion. We think back to the Sikh of Chavches Nissen, and what we hear, what we see, what we remember is the Rebbe's frustration. I have a proposal. I don't know if I'm right. Obviously, I don't know if I'm right, but I have a simple proposal. Perhaps we should look at the Sikh of Chavches Nissen a little differently. The Rebbe wants Mashiach. Inside the Rebbe's heart, there's a desire for Mashiach. You know and I know, we all understand that the Rebbe's desire for Mashiach is so strong, it's unbelievable. It's a drive that's impossible to quantize. You can't measure how powerful is the Rebbe's desire and urge for Mashiach. Yeah, but you don't always see it, right? You don't always see it. For 3 minutes, the Rebbe decided to show us what it feels like to want Mashiach. In other words, instead of looking at the Sikh of Chavches Nissen the way we did, that it's sort of a resignation, it's a despair, it's a frustration, there's another way to look at it. For a few minutes, I mean, I hate to use this word, but I mean it. It was a gilui. For 3 minutes, the Rebbe showed us how he feels, every minute of the day. For 3 minutes, the Rebbe allowed us to see what wanting Mashiach feels like. And the reason the Rebbe, and then it went, the mask went back on, right? And then you didn't see it anymore. If you remember, after Chavches Nissen, the Rebbe's mood went back. That everything changed in Lubavitch after that. But the frustration, the feeling of despair, you didn't see it again. The Rebbe wanted us to see how it feels to desire Mashiach. It's just an interpretation. It's an opinion. Why? Because the wanting Mashiach, demanding Mashiach is a chayvras gaber. It's on us. As the Rebbe said, Mashiach's coming depends on us wanting and desiring Mashiach. And this need, this obligation to want Mashiach is one of the Rebbe's continuous news. You know, every Lubavitcher knows, even if you look at a picture of the Rebbe, what happens, you feel that guilt. I'm not doing enough. You remember your moments in the Rebbe's Dalet Amis. So for some people, those moments are remembered nostalgically with warmth, and they're incredibly warm. Moments with the Rebbe were delicious. But you can't escape that the Rebbe's whole Metzius demanded something. And one of the things that the Rebbe demanded is that we need to want Mashiach Tzedakenu. That it's a chayvas gav. It's incumbent upon us that we should want Mashiach. Now, I don't want to talk forever. I don't want to put you to sleep. I want to explain Mashiach. I want to explain what Mashiach means. Of course, it's not my own explanation. It's not that I mind giving explanations, and I'm just not smart enough to make them up. This is the Rebbe's Siris, based, of course, on the Rambam. I want to explain to you how the Rebbe sees, based on Rambam, what Mashiach means. And, so to speak, let that be an insight into what we want. If we're Jews, and we're from Jews, and we're Hasidic Jews, and we say or we think, the whole Jewish world, except for Lubavitch, says every day Yigdal, and says every day Ani Maimin. Before davening they say Yigdal, and after davening they say Ani Maimin, and they say the 13 principles of faith. Lubavitch has got to be different. It's just one of those things. The Raizel's Talmud of Chaim Vital writes that Raizel told him that these tefillahs should not be said because they were not written al pi Kabbalah. Not that the Rambam didn't write al pi Kabbalah, but whoever wrote this rhyme, Yigdal is a poem, and this prose, Ani Maimin is prose, was not a makubal, and they're not al pi Chochmas Emes, and you should not say them. But the Rebbe said many times, maybe we don't say the 13 principles of faith, but we certainly think them. We meditate on the Yud Gimel Ikri HaEmunah. And of course, one of them is Ani Maimin B'Emunah Shleima B'Bias HaMashiach. So what is it that we desire? What is Mashiach Tzedakenu? So I'm going to share with you a very simple thought. It's a commonsensical thought, but it's a perspective that you have to get into your head, and then you have to actually figure out that you want this, okay? It's very simple. I'm going to ask the dumbest question in the universe, okay? And forgive me, I'm a teacher. Teachers ask dumb questions. And students also do, but teachers often ask dumb questions, okay? Is the Eibush the Balabas of the world or not? Is this world God's or not? Simple question. Is the Eibush the Balabas or not? Is this world his or not? Now, the answer, of course, is yes, he's the Balabas of the world. So the next question becomes, how come it doesn't look that way? If he's the Balabayas of the world, where's his Balabayas? If he owns the world, if he owns the earth, if everything that happens here is according to his will, where is that will? And I mean it very simply. The Eibishter gave Yidden 613 mitzvahs. The Eibishter gave Goyim Lahavdil 7 mitzvahs. Sheva mitzvahs b'nei Noach. And of course, as you know, the 7 mitzvahs of Noach are not only 7 mitzvahs, there are 7 basic mitzvahs that encompass, in the book, Encyclopedia Talmudis, he lists scores of mitzvahs, dozens of mitzvahs that Goyim have. Goyim have many more than 7. 7 are just generalities or negative mitzvahs. There's many mitzvahs that Goyim have, like Tzedakah and B'kechelim and Halvayas Hameis and Kibbut Aveim and all kinds of other things that are not Machavere. If this is God's world, we should do what God wants. How could it be that this is the Eibishter's world and the world behaves in a way which is not consistent with the will of HaKadosh Baruch? And it's a real question. It's an emunah question. Is he in charge? He's not. If he's in charge, how can we not say so? Rabbi said that's what Moshiach is. That's what the ganze meise. You know what Moshiach means? That this world runs according to Hashem's wishes. Hashem gave us a mitzvah, we do it. Hashem taught people how a civilization has to look, how a society has to look, how we behave as individuals, and as members of families, as members of communities, and as members of neighborhoods, and as members of cities, and members of states, and members of countries, and human beings in the face of the Eibishter's good earth. How a human being behaves. Mashiach simply means that people do what he says. That's Mashiach. In other words, we always talk about the miracles of Mashiach and the blessings of Mashiach. That's true. But that's not the inyan of Mashiach. Those are byproducts. The inyan of Mashiach is a simple thing. If this world is God's, why doesn't it appear that way? Mashiach makes this world look like God. And I want you to think about this. Mashiach is a person. Mashiach is a ben adam. He's a human being. He's a man. One man who makes this happen. Mashiach is a human being who has so much koyach. He's so powerful. He's so great. He's so holy. He's so wise. He's so I don't know what. But he pashut gets the whole world, Yidden and Lahavdil Goyim, to live the way Hashem wants human beings to live. The Rebbe has a sikh in Likutei Sichos, where the Rebbe says that according to this opinion, some opinions, Mashiach is not connected to any miracle. Mashiach could come and there wouldn't be a single miracle. Other than, with the wording of the Rambam, Shibud Malchus, that everybody lives as the Eibishter says to live. Yidden follow their Tayag mitzvahs, Goyim Lahavdil keep their Sheva mitzvahs, and the Rebbe says in that Sikha, could you imagine what kind of a miracle it must be for the world to change so much without a single miracle occurring? What kind of ness it is that the whole world lives as the Eibishter wants people to live without a ness. That's Mashiach. Mashiach is a person who teaches the world to live according to the Ras Hashem, and they follow him. Like I said, I'm a teacher by profession. Teachers ask stupid questions, and teachers also repeat themselves over and over and over again. So I ask my students again and again and again and again, when you learn the Rambam about Mashiach, what is the key word? What's the most important word? In chapter 11 of Hilchas Malachim u'Milchamis and Melech HaMashiach, where the Rebbe talks about the person Mashiach. Chapter 12 talks about the Yemois HaMashiach, the times of Mashiach. But chapter 11 talks about the personality, the individual man, individual human being who is Mashiach. I ask my students, what's the most important word in that entire chapter? Now, I'm not going to ask you to raise your hands or to call out. Let's not get into any trouble here. The answer is the word Matzliach. What sets Mashiach apart from all the other Gedolei Yisrael who came before him is only one thing, that he does it. Every Gadol Yisrael, every Rebbe, every Nasi has the same task, to make people on earth live according to the Ras Eibishter. Mashiach succeeds. And Api Torah, and Api Musad, and Api Chassidus, Mashiach is coming. Ani Imam B'Munah Shleima means that this person, Yamid Melech Bebeis David, Hege B'Teire Ve'esig B'Mitzvahs, Kedavid David, V'Teire Shebeksav, Teresh Balpev, Yaakov Kol Yisrael, Leilech Bo, Lechazik Bitch, Yilcham Mechamas Adesham V'Natzeach, right? All the things that the Rambam says that Mashiach is going to do, Mashiach does them actually. And Mashiach is an inyan pnimi. It's a spiritual thing, yeah? You start to mess with Mashiach, you get into trouble. We live in a time that all that means for us to do is to be makabel the Mashiach Tzidkenu. In the olden days, tzaddikim were afraid to talk about Mashiach because the boogeyman would come out of the closet. I mean, I'm sorry for being so facetious, but the forces that are against Mashiach are unbelievable. Now there are no forces against Mashiach. There's simply a need for us to be makabel the Mashiach Tzidkenu, to acknowledge that Mashiach has to come and that Mashiach is here, and that we have to accept Mashiach Tzidkenu, and we have to want Mashiach Tzidkenu. Demand him and want Mashiach Tzidkenu. So this is it's a mifza, you know? It's a mifza. It's a campaign. It's not a prayer, it's a campaign. It's a campaign that begins with us. That we have to want Mashiach. We have to get other people to want Mashiach. We have to teach the world that they have to want Mashiach and explain to them what they want and why they want it. And that Mashiach's coming is conditional on our desiring him, on our wanting him. And let me say this in closing. What is easier? What is easier? Is it easier to look at the cup as half full or to look at the cup as half empty? Yeah, I have 79 human beings that are here. I have exactly 2 faces, 3 faces. Besides for those 3 faces and myself 4 faces, I have, I guess that's, now we're up to 81. That's 77, now I have 6. 77 gray rectangles with a name and a caricature of a speaker that's a line through it, which says that you cannot interrupt. Okay, thank you for showing your face. Yeah, I'm talking to a bunch of people, and I cannot see you. Yeah, but I'm asking a question. Which is easier? Is it easier to look at your cup, my cup, as half full or half empty? And I'm going to give you a very interesting answer, and I'm saying this as a provocation, as a medium to make a point. Obviously, it's much easier to look at the cup as half empty. It's so easy to be pessimistic and negative. It's so easy to live life with a tendency, with a sentiment that it's bad. Woe to me. Woe to me. And if, God forbid, our lives are not woeful enough, you look to your neighbor and say, oh, woe to me. My neighbor has us, right? We are here. We are here. We're having this Rabbi because of a terrible, terrible tragedy, an inexplicable tragedy. Someone put around the video now, I just saw the other day, of what the Rebbe spoke after the Shiva ended for Pesha Leila Pine, Allah Shalom. And you listen to the Rebbe's words. Yeah, there's pain in the world. And I ask a simple question. Which is easier, to look at the cup as half full or look at the cup as half empty? And my answer is that it's much easier to look at the cup as half empty. Have reasons to complain. But it's so depressing. It's so useless. It's so stupid. It's such a bad choice. The cup is half full. Thank God. The cup is half empty, unfortunately. The choice is ours. To focus on the cup as half full and to be disappointed, frustrated, negative, or as they say in the culture, part of the problem, or to focus on the fact that the cup is half full and to be positive and optimistic and looking forward, and as they say in the culture, being part of the solution. Or to say it in different words. By the way, in Tanya, chapter 31, the Alter Rebbe very succinctly articulates this. I'm gonna tell you words in Hebrew, and I'll translate them into English. They're some of my favorite words. I used to teach these krakim all the time, and I made my students memorize them. This is the quote: Teikar nafshay be'enav, lismoyach b'simchasa, yeser מבגוף הנבזה, שלערבב ולבלבל שמחת הנפש בעיצובן הגוף. And in English this means, a person's soul should be so valuable, so my neshama should be so important to me that I should celebrate its joy rather than the shame and the disappointment that's connected to my body. And then the Alter Rebbe says, do not confuse, do not confuse, do not entangle the joy of the soul with the sadness of the body. This is a quote. Don't allow the joy of the neshama to become entangled and burdened by the heaviness of the body. This phrase is the same thing as saying, the cup is half full, the cup is half empty. It's a choice. And to choose the cup is half full is harder. It's harder. But it's the only option. Because looking at the cup as half empty is like knocking the cup over. It's depressing. It's not helpful. It's not helpful. It's not constructive. It's not good. And therefore, it's not just. It's not correct. It's not correct. It's not correct even when it seems correct. Every human being always can look at his life, like the Rambam writes, 50-50. Look at the world. Look at our place vis-a-vis Moshiach, and all the different challenges that we face as a person and as a community, as a family and as a community and as a neighborhood and as a city and so on and so forth. And we have as many reasons to look at our life and say it's great, and to use that energy as a motivation for Avodas Hashem. And we have just as many reasons to be sad and depressed. It's much easier. The easiest thing in the world is to sit on a couch and eat chips. The easiest thing in the world is to say, woe is us. I'm waiting for a Moshiach to come and save me. But it's foolish, and it's depressing, and it's wrong, and it's lazy. It's lazy. The half a cup that's empty, to focus on that is to be lazy, because it's really accepting that the cup is empty, not to try and fill it. Focus in the half a cup that's full. Takes energy and effort. And you know what? The person next to you thinks you're weird. When you demonstrate, when I demonstrate, when we demonstrate, B'tachan in Hashem, when we ooze, when we radiate an energy of Emunah B'tachan, Mashiach's coming, yeah? And we live a life of simcha, the people around us look at us as strange. Why? Because Elam Haza is depressed. Life's tough, life's hard, especially now. What? Those are the choices. It's black and white. According to the Tanya, it's black and white. There's no gray. In psychology, there's a lot of gray, but in Hasidus, it's black and white. Energy or no energy. Half full, half empty. Positive, negative. And the whole Hasidus teaches us, you have to be a part of the solution. You have to be up. You have to be sameach. Not because life is good, but because it's going to be worse if I don't look at it this way. And a person has to take it. A yid has to live his life on a madrega where he focuses on the neshama. He focuses on Mashiach. And that gives him emunah, that gives him bitachon, that gives him optimism, that gives him joy. And then he lives. If he doesn't do that, and he has good excuses, very good excuses, incredibly good excuses, so he's right, but he's miserable. He's right. I know a story, and forgive me for finishing with this, but I'm going to finish with this, about a person who is no longer with us, who had a very hard life. They suffered a lot. And one of the many ill experiences in their life was that they lost a child, a married child who left many orphans behind. This person wrote the Rebbe a letter of protest, essentially. How could this happen? I don't know the details of the letter because it was written in a language that I don't understand, but they wrote the Rebbe a long letter lamenting life. And the Rebbe answered this person, whatever energy you have has to be dedicated to helping, Baila Shiachya, her husband, and her children. When this person received this answer from the Rebbe, it could have come across as very severe. The person writes to the Rebbe, complains to the Rebbe about what's the Rebbe's answer? There's no time to complain. There's work to be done. Go do it. Now, what the Rebbe told her is true. What the Rebbe told her is very painful. What's important to understand that what the Rebbe told her is not only for the sake of her son-in-law and her children, it's for her sake. When a person goes through an assignment, and this is an assignment, we're collected here because what the Rebbe calls a mitzvah shendet, something that the Eibush did which you cannot make sense out of. And the avodah, the task of what? Of being involved in the up part of this, rather than the down part of this, in the cup is half full part of this, rather than the cup is half empty, which is quite a challenge. It's quite a challenge, is not only for the sake of the people we may be trying to help, but it's for our own sake. And in a real way, that's what Moshiach stands for. Moshiach stands for the world is full of light. The Rabbi used to say all the time that this world is Hashem's garden. And then in 5 minutes, he would call it a jungle, It's God's garden. It just doesn't seem that way yet. And this is a message of the Rebbe. This is a message of Hasidus. It's a message of Torah. It's a message of Yiddishkeit. So, of course, I want to wish Beryl and das Kinderlach, Marich Hashem V'shonim Teve, sein gesund und stark, soll sicher sein zu der Gule Schleibe, Vakitze, der Adner Sheikh Niafer. Lebenschlag Menschen mit gesund und mit Lebendigkeit und mit Gutskeit. And all of us should be better because of the V'achayit and the Libe. We should make a difference in the world, and we should be zeich to the Gule Schleibe. Good night to all of you, and I thank you all for joining me. And I have to say that rectangular gray squares are quite interesting, especially when they're spaced, and I get to, in my own imagination, create different formations. Here's a person, and here's a gray space, and then there is 20 gray spaces. Okay, good night to everybody. Seid alle gesund.